name is State Representative Matt Shaheen. I have two of my friends here, Byron and Tanner. We wanted to connect with you this evening and talk about race relations in the United States, really North Texas and Texas as well as across the nation. You know, our nation's going through all kinds of challenges, health-related, economic, but really race discussions, what's happening with race has been to the forefront. Of course, all the tragic events that happened on Memorial Day, and then on for moving on from there. You know, Byron Tanner and I, we've been friends now for a number of years. We've got some diversity here, and we've just been thinking about what's going on in our nation. And, you know, quite frankly, we were hopeful in the very beginning as we as a nation were coming together and looking at issues facing all of us. And after a while, we got disappointed. It seems like the nation somewhat got distracted. Protests turned into riots. The left and the right, people seemed just to get back into their corners. And so what we thought we would do this evening is set all that aside, all those preconceived notions, and just have an open, honest discussion on race, how we see it, and you know, maybe what we can do moving forward. How do we move forward as a community, as a state, as a nation, to address, handle, and God willing, maybe even one day actually put an exact end to race. So with that, Byron, let me just start up with you. You know, there's a lot of people obviously in the community that play, you know, different roles. We have different leaders that we look to. Give us your perspective with respect to the community and who we can look to help address this and have a dialogue about it.
I think when you mention community, you have your religious community, your military community, your educational community, as well as your business community. I think all those communities represent a certain element of the larger community, the macro element of the community. Those are micros. They are represented together, the macro. And I think once the macro can start talking to each other, I think we can accomplish a lot more and be more respectful of each other's differences and find out what they are and how can we move our community as a whole further along.
We got a lot of people. We've got our teachers. We've got our faith community, like you said, whether it's our churches, our temples, all our different faiths. And really, from, you know, I can obviously speak from the Christian faith. And God says that He loves us dearly, and He loves us equally as well. Tanner, we're talking about the community. What other, you know, either entities or individuals in our community can address this, can help us address this?
Well, the employers and the corporate business would be the best way to assist with this as well, because, you know, we go to work every day and they're the ones we spend 8 hours a day on our job. And a lot of employers are putting together a diversity council kind of thing to the company and help employees to talk about diversity and having the dialogue going on within the companies, and hire people that, you know, represent the community. I think that's very important for them to do.
I've seen it in a lot of different companies. Before COVID, I would travel around the nation, and it seems like companies that at some level were trying to tackle diversity of thought, because the thought process is the more diverse your workforce, the more people with different backgrounds, right, the better it is for the company. And obviously it seems like, you know, since the George Floyd murder and so forth, that they've redoubled up those efforts. So I think you're right. I think it's our faith leaders, our teachers, our corporations. Really, we have a lot of different people within the community that can play a role. And notice we haven't talked about the politicians, right? I mean, I think personally, I think part of the problem is we look to, not all politicians, but there's some politicians that actually use this as a wedge and maybe aren't really all that interested in uniting everybody. And so I agree. I think it's the churches. In fact, after the George Floyd murder, one of the community events that I went to was a prayer rally. And so a lot of the churches got together at the Collin County courthouse, and we prayed. And we lifted our broken hearts to the Lord, and there's just a really beautiful spirit of unity, right? We all got together as a community. The Lord requires us to love kindness, do justice, and walk humbly with Him. And there was that humble spirit amongst amongst thousands of us as we gathered together in prayer. So it was a really neat event. I loved it. So let's move from the community and talk about just how we communicate, because the reality is a lot of us communicate pretty darn differently, right? I mean, Byron, our generations talk differently. Let's talk about communication.
Definitely, as the generations grow, different devices, just different language, different lingo. Now you have a pandemic on top of that with the mask. Communication is not just a verbal; it's also physical, and how someone moves. So I think just some people don't understand that, and people get offended, or they don't relay the message enough to where the communicator really receives the message. So we have to make sure when we're trying to communicate with someone, that the message we want them to receive is the one we want them to receive, and take a lot of the guesswork out of it. Because if they have to try to interpret what you're telling them, that's where the assumptions come in and the confusion starts.
Yeah, well, and you're right about the mask too. By the way, it's like I forgot how much verbal communication there is with our expressions, and you got a mask, and it just makes it that much harder.
I got that from my wife, who's her teaching ELL, English language as a second language.
Yeah.
The kids need to see lips move, and they need to be able to see those things happening. Because with your face covered up, it's hard to do that. So.
And a lot of that nonverbal communication, right, Tanner? A lot of communications happening now over social media and computer and that type of stuff. I mean, how do we tackle that?
I mean, we're not interacting with each other now. I mean, with social media, it's easy to be a keyboard warrior, right? It's easy to attack, and then the message that you put on social media sometimes get interpreted wrong. And then sometimes, I mean, a lot of people, when they read my message, they're like, well, why you do that? I'm like, that's not what I meant. Like, calm down. I mean, stop defending. I mean, a lot of time people too eager to defend themselves rather than to listen to the other person and what they have to say. We're all lacking that in society right now because it's easier to hide behind the screen and type whatever you want to type out, but face-to-face interaction, there's a lack of that.
Well, there's not a lot of listening on social media.
No.
There's a lot of reacting and throwing out my viewpoint. I love the Facebook post that says, raise your hand if your viewpoint is ever going to change because of somebody else's post. But what about I find that even the way I email people is differently, because I inadvertently offended somebody because maybe I was too direct with email and that kind of stuff. I mean, have y'all experienced that either with social media or email or anything like that?
Even with text message too.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Especially, people can read it wrong, and sometimes you're like, I was in a hurry, take a shortcut. I mean, if you want to really understand, pick up a phone and call and talk over the phone, talk it out, because we don't have that kind of dialogue anymore. And we're having to be human and talk to one another. I mean, even for us being here, there already a miscommunication already, the perceptions out there that something is going on, but why can't we just have a dialogue and just sit there and talking about what can we do to better the community? As far as politics go, like you're reaching across the aisle to work for the common good of the district and the people in this state, and we don't have that anymore. We just too one-sided. We just it's like my way is the correct way.
I grew up in Virginia, and it was a little cooler there than the temperature was than Texas, and so a lot of people would gather in the front porches, and you really you knew your neighbors, and when we were kids, we'd ride up and down the street. You were just outside more, and you interacted with your neighbors, and of course with the pandemic, there's less of that as well, but it just seems like there's just less and less of that. So yeah, I mean, I think good points around communication. There's generational differences. The pandemic's made it harder. We're isolated. We're wearing a mask, and social media. That whole dynamic. There's so much misunderstanding with text messaging as well, especially when you're a really bad speller like I am. It really confuses everybody. Well, let's talk about awareness. How do we build awareness? Because here's the thing, right? There's a lot of people that they've never experienced racism before. Maybe they haven't even seen it, right? But we're a diverse crowd here. We have African American, Asian American, Middle Eastern American, and so we've all had some kind of exposure to it, probably more than others. And so, but there's a lot of people. The reality is, a lot of people out there haven't experienced it, and so they may not be as sensitive. How do we build that awareness? What do we?
I think it starts with the individual. It's okay to say you don't know.
Mm-hmm.
It's okay to say I don't know. I'm unaware. Help me out and help me understand this. And I think that's where the self awareness or self reliance or just self evaluation. You do a self evaluation and don't be afraid to say, you know what, I don't know that, and I'm willing to listen and talk to this person about the culture or the food. Go to a Vietnamese restaurant and have lunch. I lived in South Korea for 3 years. I didn't know it. I loved it over there. I learned the language, the culture, the food, the people. So I think you have to make yourself available to accept those differences, because that's what the world's all about. Being able to accept the differences, and at the end of the day, it's going to make you a better person.
Well, one of the churches in Collin County is really being very purposeful. What they're doing is they call it their community table, I think, and they're being very purposeful as far as they're encouraging people in their congregation to actually go have lunch, go have dinner with people that look different than you. So you can have those types of discussions as well, right?
I mean, at my church, when I was growing up, we had this kind of exchange program.
Mm-hmm.
So we will send a group of us go to different church in the community once a week, and then to represent and just to mingle and then talk about their experience with that church and learn to one another. It's a totally different, because when we go to a African American church, there's a lot of singing, there's a lot of interaction. That's something very different than going to a Catholic mass, right? It's just very structured. And so there's something like that that will help the community out as well. And being in the military, like you and I both serving in Korea, and it gave us the opportunity to represent the United States. So for us to be, as a soldier, representing the United States, we have to learn the culture. We have to understand. That way we don't upset the foreign nation that we are in. And it gave me the opportunity to learn so much about that, the Korean culture, even though I'm Asian American, but every Asian countries is different. And so we were able to learn, and I was able to help out the local orphanage and teaching them ESL and getting to learn the community and do the community service. And those are the things that I'm blessed to be able to have that experience to learn and then represent our country in foreign soil.
The idea of visiting different churches is really a great idea, because we're pretty segregated on Sunday, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think we need to see that, right? There's African American churches, and then there's predominantly white churches, and then there's even Chinese Baptist churches that I've seen. So we are kind of segregated. That's really a good way to be purposeful, is to visit other churches. It is funny though. At least at my church, I noticed that it is becoming more and more like the United Nations, right? When you're walking into the entryway of the church, because the reality is Collin County is getting a lot more diverse. We have a lot more people, not only moving to Collin County and to Texas, but Collin County from other states, but from other nations. We have a growing population of people from all parts of Asia, whether it's India or Pakistan or Malaysia. Just really, the diversity is really growing. So to be able to have some unity on during our Sunday worship is really a pretty neat idea. What about the challenges, though, Tanner? Because like a lot of times there's just generalizations that occur. There's stereotypes. I mean, what do we do about that, right? Cause
I think that's what is giving people more perception about racism than anything. Because let's say for Asian, right, I feel like for Asian you can't drive, and that is a generalization for the Asian community. And so people start putting the stereotypes into the Asian community because of that. And so I think it's how people behave is what give people the perception of prejudice. Like within the Asian community, like within the Vietnamese community, there's racism, the prejudice between the North, the South, or the Central. So, I mean, every culture, there's always it's going to be there, but it's just how we communicate with one another, how we, you know, put together our differences and work together as a cohesive unit. Because at the end of the day, we all bleed the same.
Right.
You know, at the end of the day, when we die, we all just look the same. It's what matters what we do right now on this earth and get to know one another. Because with this whole COVID thing, we don't know when we're going to go. And for us to tear each other apart and be hateful toward each other, there's no way to go about it, right? I mean, we can cross party line and talk about issues and come to a common ground about things that matters to the people in this district, and that's what we need to do. And don't generalize, right? Because I have friends from all walks of life. I mean, I love to travel. When I travel, I do backpacking and I stay at hostel place. And so for me, that's given me the opportunity to learn from people from different cultures at the same
Do
time,
you do that around the United States or like even globally?
and globally too.
Okay.
Like my senior year, I just picked up and backpacked across Europe. I
Oh,
just
wow.
do it on my own, and I meet people from Mexico, Ireland, France, Belgium. I mean, Canada.
Now you're both military. Now, did you have that same type of experience where when you were in the military, did you move around a lot, like around the globe? Or
Oh yeah,
what,
definitely.
what was that like?
You're constantly adjusting.
Mm-hmm.
The one good thing is you have to believe in your teammates, your work environment, yourself, because you're all that you have. It's just you and your team. That's it. And so you have a mission accomplished. And I think that's what at the end of the day is. You don't want to let your teammates down.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the whole butter buddy system. Is we always keep each other.
Is it
accountable.
because there's something bigger than you, or
If it's bigger than you, of course, you go to basic training for 8 weeks and you go to AIT, but I think in basic training is where they just convert you from a civilian to think like the team aspect. But again, I grew up playing sports in Texas my whole life. So my mom was the CEO of the Texas Department of Corrections. So I always understood the team concept to a certain degree. It's when I became a leader and I had to raise a 17-year-old homeless kid over private and mentor him to where he became rank out with that.
yeah.
So I think for me, being a part of the team and then being a leader and having a different sight picture, it changes how you look at it. Now I'll go back to, I want to revert back to talking about some early sports communication.
Yeah.
The family aspect, we have to cut the television off.
Mm-hmm.
I don't watch a lot of I like watching Wheel of Fortune. Certain shows I like to watch.
Wheel of Fortune.
Oh yeah, that's one of my favorites. Pat St. Jeff.
Oh.
But anyway, but yeah.
It's lost credibility.
But it's funny. It's something to take my mind off everything else, and I left the end of it. But I think we have to watch programs because it's entertainment. End of the day, that stuff is scripted. It's entertainment. It's not real, but it's controlling the way our young kids think. Because parents are now working 15 hours a day, 12 hours a day. They get home, they still may not be making enough income to cover their rent, their light bill. So they have other issues. So they got to get home and get rested to go to their second job.
Yeah.
So the kid got to literally raise themselves. And I think and that's where the community again comes in. Officer John, Officer P, Sister Jacobs next door. I mean, these are the people in the community that's going to catch little Johnny by the hand and say, hey, make sure you get on the bus and go to school because they understand moms. She's going to, but we don't know our neighbors anymore.
Yeah. And that's tough with more and more children that are growing up with maybe a single mom or single dad. Being a single mom in the United States that's the hardest
I think
job.
it's 61% of homes now are single parents.
Yeah.
I mean, I was raised by a single mom when I first came to the United States. And if it wasn't for my church, it wasn't for the community, it wasn't for the police department,
Correct.
chief that helped mentoring me and helped me with going to Boy Scout, church campaign, If it wasn't for that, I don't know what I would be like because they're my family. Besides, my mom is too busy working, raising me, and then paying the bills and just parents are busy raising their kids, but they all have work too, but they try to help each other out. But if it wasn't for the community growing up, I wouldn't be where I am today. I'd probably be, screw up
Yeah.
and headed toward the wrong direction. But because of that, it helped me a lot. And growing up, I don't see any of this racism that we see right now. Because growing up, I go to church, I go Boy Scout, I see everybody as human.
Yeah.
We don't differentiate between whether you're African American, Asian, or Middle Eastern. We just see each other as people.
Yeah.
And at some point along the line, I don't know what happened. And I was like, when soldiers stationed in Korea, they're like, oh, I hate Korea. It sucks. All this. I'm like, well, have you experienced the culture? Have you go outside the post? Have you traveled around the country? Have you get to know the people? No. You're too busy at the bar drinking, and that's all you know, and that's all you're going to be experiencing. So we need to start doing that. We all start with a family, with community, because at the end of the day, we all lift each other's up.
Yeah.
And that's what we hear as a community. Because if the community thrive, we all thrive.
That's so important. Is that the statistics are clear. If there's a child without a mom and a dad, they're 6 times more likely to live in poverty or be in the criminal justice system and all that type. So if somebody stepped in, your church family, and loved on you, and obviously made a huge difference to make you the man that you are today. And so, I mean, that's a great theme for us. Maybe that this is where we end this. Is that I view things very similar to what you all have said. Tanner, you really said it well. Like, we view each other as humans, fellow humans, and I always look at it as everybody is a child of God. They're a creation of God. God loves them desperately, and loves them equally. And that's a really good perspective to have. And I think everybody that's watching us this evening, what Byron and Tanner and I would like you to do is from here on, do what we're doing. Go have a purposeful dialogue like this. Have breakfast, lunch, or dinner. We typically get together for lunch. I'm trying to get Byron to buy, but he hasn't done that yet. But we're still working on that. But have a dialogue about these types of topics, and just enjoy each other's company. And we'll probably do this again. This has been fun. We might have to do it over a meal and that type of stuff. But thank you all so much for tuning in, and we really hope you got something out of it. I've certainly loved being with you guys this evening. So thank you all for tuning in and listening to us, and have a blessed evening. Thank you.
Thank you.